Hi everyone, my name is Lily. I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind, and I'm going to be sharing vampire books today. So here's my small physical pile of them. I also have some that I don't have in physical copy, and I also have some on my TBR. So please keep watching until the TBR portion because I need to know if I should bother reading these books. Hopefully so, but you never know. The first one I want to start off with is Silver and Nightfall. If you've been following me for a bit, you will know how much I love Silver Under Nightfall. This is an adult queer fantasy. It's like in the embodiment of if you have a love triangle, why don't you just all get together kind of vibes. If that's what you love, this is for you. The main character is a bounty hunter, and he specifically hunts down rogue vampires. The fantasy world of Silver Under Nightfall has like rogue vampires. It has kind of vampire courts, vampire politics as well. So he is only hunting down rogue vampires, and he has to work together with a vampire heiress and her fiance to try to figure out the rogue vampire situation, what's going on, and there's a mystery component to that as well. I love this one because there's a great balance between character and action and adventure. I think that if you love also the idea of found family, the idea of characters opening up to new people, and kind of also experiences and feelings about themselves and acceptance and like the radical self-acceptance kind of thing, then you'll really enjoy this one. I cannot wait for the sequel, which I haven't read yet, but I own. But, this book, it was so fabulous. I've seen this around a bunch, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone just knew how much I love Silver Under Nightfall. The next one is The Serpent and the Wings of Night. This one has been going around a lot recently in the kind of intersection between romance and fantasy. So basically, this to me is kind of like it's a deadly competition. So, okay. Let me just go back. This book gave me Underworld meets Deadly Competition vibes, except Underworld reversed, I guess. So if you loved Underworld and you love the idea of deadly competition, you should read this one. Basically, there's an adopted human daughter of a vampire king. She enters into a legendary tournament to kind of turn the scales. She is a human in a vampire court, and so while she's well trained, she's not a vampire. And so even if she, to get any power kind of in her family and also at the court in the life that she lives in, she's gonna have to become more. And so in this book, that's the deadly competition part, and she has to make an unlikely alliance with a rival who she kind of hates that person's guts. So, like with many unlikely alliances and stuff like that, this has a lot about truth. It has a lot about also alliances and trust. I would say also varying levels of trust. What happens when people gain your trust, lose your trust, test your trust, everything about trust. And as I said, the Deadly Competition has a ton of different trials and everything like that. So the action is really great in this one. And I'm really excited for the sequel, which is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, which is out. The third book is coming out later this year, but the second book is already out. I have this beautiful sprayed edge version. And so I wanted to recommend this. As I said, if you've been following the kind of romance fantasy little web, the intersection of the web, right, between them, you have to have seen this round. The next one I want to chat about is Immortal Dark. Immortal Dark is just so good. Not only is it the most gorgeous edition of this book, but basically it is about a girl, and she loses her sister, but she's convinced that her sister was abducted by a vampire. So then she goes to this kind of dark academia setting of this vampire school that you have to be admitted into, and there she kind of learns about the vampires, learns about also her own family's history related to the vampires and why a vampire would even abduct her sister. And so it's a story that, yes, is deeply connected to sisterhood, but it's also a story about revenge, right? Because she's going to that society because she thinks her sister has been abducted by a vampire. But it's about revenge, and it's about kind of this idea of what happens when our whole life kind of revolves around revenge. What will we do? How does it like impact sort of the relationships we have in friendships? Are we only defined by our revenge? So this one was fabulous. There's also kind of a dark academia aspect in the sense that there's schoolings, there's kind of things that are going on at the school and with kind of the vampire world as a whole. And it's going to be a series. I cannot wait. And this book was so fabulous. Next, I want to chat about a contemporary romance, and obviously there's vampires in it, so it's like contemporary setting, but it has vampires in it. And it is My Roommate is a Vampire. Also, My Vampire Plus One recently came out, like pretty recently actually, which is the companion novel to this contemporary romance fantasy adventure. So My Roommate is a Vampire. Our main character is a struggling artist, and then she has to find a new place to live, and she ends up rooming with, you guessed it from the title, a vampire. In general, this book is just super fun, it's like one of those romance books, one of those fantasy romance books you kind of fall into. You have a really great time reading it. I really liked a few different touches in this book. The first one is that the love interest is super cute. I think this book doesn't take itself too seriously. It talks a little bit about immortality and about sort of acclimating to modern culture a little bit, but it doesn't delve into some of the other vampire topics that you might see about kind of mortality and losing touch with mortality. But I loved also that this book and also the sequel, My Vampire Plus One, has these kind of interstitials, I think is what you call it, at the beginning of every chapter. And these kind of key us into not only how Frederick feels, who's the love interest, but also different pieces of the world and the lore. And it makes it feel a little bit more dimensional in that aspect. You get the feeling that there's just like more going on in the background, and because of that, you get to see a lot of Frederick's inner thoughts, because the majority of the story is told from the human perspective. I would say that that's like 99.9% of it, except for kind of these rare moments where we can kind of see Frederick's point of view. But it's a really kind of fun, just really fun romance, like fantasy romance with vampires. I grew up reading paranormal urban fantasies. This is not really necessarily that, because there's not the high stakes action that you would necessarily see in one of those, but it's just really fun, and it brought me back to those like nostalgic roots, because I've been spending so much time in the romance category. I now want to talk about a book that isn't out yet. It comes out later in the year, but I'm going to be doing a panel with the author of A Cruel Thirst, which is a YA vampire book coming out later in the year. I don't know when it comes out. I will leave all the information down below. But A Cruel Thirst basically was a vampire hunter meets a vampire, and they have to team up. She is committed to, her whole family is committed to hunting vampires. He unwillingly becomes a vampire, which is obviously a story. And so they start working together to kind of figure out what to do, and also figure out how to kind of take down vampires together. So there's definitely an enemies to lovers aspect to this one. A Cruel Thirst manages really to balance kind of these romance, swoony, star-crossed lovers kind of esque vibe to it. Star-crossed lovers being vampire, human, and also vampire hunter, while also dealing a lot with kind of family legacies, family secrets. I cannot talk more about that because that is spoilery, but there's certainly another added level, an added aspect to that kind of mystery, to the kind of vampire lore within the whole kind of book, and that's why I really loved Cruel Thirst and wanted to talk about it. It's also kind of like the starting point that I had for this video idea. In general, I think that vampires have such a cultural kind of touchstone. You know, there are so many different, not only folklore, folk tales, mythological tales, fairy tales about vampires, so many different perceptions of them, what they can do, what they can't do. So I find it really interesting when you take a figure that has so many expectations, so much history kind of how we see vampires in media all around the world, and also, you know, songs, music, I guess for the same thing, TV, movies, books, I think it's really interesting to see authors' take on vampires and see them looking at it from different perspectives. I want to chat now about 4 books which are on my TBR which have vampires. The first one is This Ravenous Fate. It is a historical fiction that also meets vampires. It's set in 1926, and you have reapers who were once human vampires. They're on the rise, and there are also reaper hunting / vampire hunting enterprises, which have also kind of, it says a jazz age Harlem. So there's also this idea about sort of organized criminals running nightclubs, and our main character is a reluctant heir to the family of vampire hunters who also, help rule this kind of setting. She has to deal with not only those family dynamics, not only wanting obviously to be taken down by the reapers / once human vampires. It has queer black girls, it has vampires, and it's set in like a historical fiction vibe setting. So I'm really excited for this one. The next one is The Hunter's Gambit, which I read Bluebird, and I absolutely loved Bluebird, which is a sci-fi. I think that The Hunter's Gambit is more of a fantasy, romantic-y kind of vibes. Basically, it says malevolent vampires and a locked room escape adventure. Basically, they're they're aristocrat vampires who terrorize human citizens. This is just literally from the Goodreads synopsis. But we have the main character who is a blacksmith, and she specializes in killing vampires, right? We have another vampire hunter. And so when a group of vampires attack her and try to steal one of her magical creations, then she is forced to be in and attend the vampire court. So that is The Hunter's Gambit. As I said, I really liked Bluebird, so I'm really excited for The Hunter's Gambit. I honestly don't know why I didn't get this book earlier because of how much I really, really liked Bluebird, so I've got to track down a copy of this one. The next one is Lucy Undying. So obviously a lot of vampire books will kind of pay homage or be retellings of Dracula, and Lucy Undying is a retelling of Dracula, but it's actually from the perspective of one of Dracula's first victims, whose name is Lucy. So Lucy is one of Dracula's first victims, so she obviously will become a vampire because Dracula is a vampire. And so she spends her whole life trying to run away from Dracula, which makes sense because he's not a great guy. And we've kind of seen this a lot in different retellings. Like, we know he's not a great person. And so I heard that there's also perspectives from that timeline and also perspectives from a 21st century London perspective where she meets an author. So I'm excited about that. And honestly, I've been a little bit wary to delve into Dracula retelling just because in the past they've been hit and miss for me. So I had Lucy Undying on my TBR, but I wasn't sure if I was going to read it. But then I saw Sammy, I will link Sammy's TikTok profile down below. Sammy talk about specifically the dual kind of timeline perspective of it. And then I was sold because I'm a sucker for a good dual timeline thing. I just love them so much. And so I had to read that one, or I will read that one if people also tell me that's good. And the last one is So Thirsty, which, okay, I didn't realize was a vampire story. Okay, I feel really actually bad about telling this story, but I had been emailed about So Thirsty, and I was interested in it, but I was on vacation at the time, so I couldn't really respond. And so when I got a kind of reminder email being like, oh, So Thirsty is out, I was kind of like, okay. And so I was reading my email, and I was like, wait, does this say vampire? Did I miss that this whole time? But basically, these best friends have a night out. They're both dealing with their own stuff. And then it says, pretty eternal consequences in this bloody, seductive novel. And I read that, and I didn't realize it was vampires when I first read it. And then I got as I said in the email, it did say vampires, like a vampire best friend Thelma and Louise kind of thing. And then I was like, yes. So this is just a great example of how marketing really impacts a book. So I'm really excited for So Thirsty as well. And those were the different vampire books I wanted to talk about. So all vampire books you can pick up now, vampire book you can pre-order, and vampire books I need your thoughts and recommendations on as well. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I have been loving the resurgence of vampire books, honestly. As someone whose teen years were really impacted by vampire books, I'm excited for this new wave of vampire books that we've been seeing. I feel like between being a teen and now, I didn't see a lot of new releases that were vampire books. Maybe also I wasn't necessarily looking for them as much, and now I'm more keyed into the book community. But I'm excited. I'm so excited for this vampire renaissance. I'd love to know everyone's thoughts, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.